Anti-vaccine groups have been targeting schools across the country in protest over vaccines for children. It's been proposed that exclusion zones should be introduced in order to keep them away. But is this right? Here's Giles Bell. He's a philosophy of religion teacher and a senior admissions tutor at Shrewsbury School. He joins us now. Giles, is keeping anti-vax parents away from schools like this helpful or harmful to the children?
Well, it's a good question. Good morning. But I think I work in a secondary school, and I would have thought that in a secondary school, the pupils and the teachers are able to discuss these sort of things in class, and a good science department and a good headmaster or headmistress will be discussing these things with their children. And I would have thought it's not really a huge issue. If it was a primary school, then I think, smaller children might find this sort of thing unsettling on their way into school. It also, let's face it, it has to depend on the style of protest. So, I mean, if there's a couple of people just sort of politely saying, I'm choosing not to take the vaccine, and here's why, that's one thing. But if there's a sort of howling mob outside the gates yelling abuse at the children as they go in, I think that's a different thing.
Giles, how's it working inside the gates? I mean, from a classroom point of view, on this programme last week, we were talking about how prohibitive and restrictive it would be, but we're not there. We're not there in your position, witnessing and seeing how you teach and how they respond.
Well, I still think that, people who choose not to take the vaccine are still in a minority, and that is reflected in our school community as well. So there will be one or two people whose families have chosen not to take the vaccine. There's some healthy debates going on around the school. And may I say, not just in the philosophy department, but probably in any lesson, because these topics will come up in any lesson. But I think that, and in a funny way, sometimes it's important to respect the minority position. So it's important that actually a child who's not been vaccinated because their parents don't want them to be, or they choose not to for their own beliefs, you have to make sure that child is given the respect for their position. So I think but I think that in general, I think it's always important to have a healthy debate about these sort of issues.
No one's denying a healthy debate is always welcome, certainly in schools. But according to a survey by the Association of School and College Leaders, 4 out of 5 schools say they've been targeted by anti-vaxxers. They report that many staff and leaders say they're intimidated. And you say that, you don't have a problem with them in secondary schools, perhaps. But, children as young as 11 coming into secondary school for the first time after being in the nurturing environment of a primary school would rightly find that quite intimidating, wouldn't they?
Yeah, as I said before, I mean, it depends, where. I can't speak for other schools around the country, and I suspect that maybe in some of the more populous areas of the country, maybe the protesters are a little bit more threatening. I don't know. In rather nice Shrewsbury, I haven't seen any of that kind of activity. But I think that, as I say, I think that actually an 11-year-old going into a secondary school, that's in a sense big school. I think they need to start to discuss these sort of things, and I don't, as I say, I don't see it as threatening.
But if adults are saying they're threatened, adults are reporting that they've been threatened by it. So I would be surprised if an 11-year-old wasn't. That's my question.
I'm guessing then if the protest is threatening in the sense that there are people shouting abuse at teachers as they walk through the school gates, then that raises the level of the protest, doesn't it? And I think at that point you can start to say, well, hang on, and maybe phone people and say, well, actually, let's clear these people out, because I think there's no reason why a teacher should be abused on their way to work in the way that anyone else should be.
Giles, got to cut across you there and say goodbye to you. Really appreciate your insight there.